All right. So today we're going to be talking about those Star Trek TNG episodes. I forgot to hit record, so people are watching this afterwards. We were talking for a couple minutes, but we hadn't started yet. We're going to be talking about Power Play, which is episode 15, all the way through The Cost of Living, which is episode 20. Some good ones, some interesting, discussion-provoking ones that we were already texting each other about. And some that we'll glance through, but
we'll just breeze right through those.
Breeze right through. The first one though was episode 15 of season 5, so this is Power Play. This is the one where the alien entities, Data, Troy, and O'Brien are on an away mission, and thank you, and they basically their heads get infected and they are not who they say they are. They basically found a distress call from an old Starfleet ship, I think, and originally, was that the case?
Yeah, I think so. And it obviously turns out that the Deanna, Troy, O'Brien, and Data get possessed, basically, by people claiming to be those people that had left the distress call, but turns out that they're just a penal colony of ghosts.
Right.
It's basically what it turned out to be.
I mean, that's a really good way of putting it. You said it reminded you of some Supernatural episodes, and I haven't really watched Supernatural, so take it away.
Yeah, it did. So, like, there's a whole through line of Supernatural with ghost possession where when a ghost first doesn't pass on because they have unfinished business, and they possess people, like at first they're kind of normal in themselves, but the longer they stay on Earth and the longer they possess people, they become like warped, vengeful spirits, and they just are not themselves anymore. So there were some things in this that reminded me of that.
Interesting. Cool. And it was kind of like this whole degradation, like they show up, we're like, oh cool, that was weird, like I think they're okay. And then it just got increasingly not okay.
Increasingly not. Well, yeah, exactly. That's what kind of made me think of it, is that Picard was trying to reason with Deanna, who's supposedly this old Starfleet captain. So you'd think he'd have some way to like appeal to that, and be like, hey, we're both on the same side. We're both in Starfleet. Like, I'm not sure I believe you, but I'm going to still try and like work with you because you're clear or you're saying you're this person, but the person is like not responding rationally and is being really like aggressive. And so that's what made me think of it, is because maybe 20 years ago he might have found his way back to reason, but now he's like just completely gone.
Interesting.
But then they ended up not being them at all. So
right, but then there was a whole other layer on top of that as well.
Right.
But it's a fun episode. I think any episodes where you get to see the actors play other characters is
exactly
fun. Yeah. And
exactly
disorienting.
Yeah, completely disorienting. But you can just tell that they're like relishing in it. They're like, yes, I get to play someone different,
Yeah, totally. And especially to see Data play that role as well.
Yeah.
It's just really fun.
You can tell. Yeah. So it was fun.
Yeah, it's a good Monster of the Week type episode.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I'm never opposed to, sort of, especially away missions gone awry. Or Planet of the Week episodes in this case.
Right.
So it's a good one. But yeah, not a terrible ton to say about it.
Not really.
But the next one is episode 16, which was Ethics. This is the one where Worf is paralyzed, and I want to hear from you a little bit, because if people are coming on and they haven't seen our stream before, this is your first time watching these episodes.
Yes.
And you have become attached to Worf.
I have. I love him. So I was a little bit nervous, I mean, I know that he like is in the future seasons, and I know that he's in Deep Space Nine, so I was like, he's gonna be okay.
Right. No, but Samantha, it's all flashbacks. This is his final episode.
That could be a thing. So, but I was still kind of like, oh my gosh, Worf is like, he's confined and he can't do anything. So it's clearly like he's being Worf about it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything really about the hi.
Oh, thanks, Immersion. Thanks for being here.
I didn't know anything about the ritual suicide stuff.
Right.
So that was a surprise.
That's kind of like, that was lore basically introduced here, you know, for
okay.
learning about Klingons. Yeah. I don't think that's I don't think that's, even if it was like an aside mention, this is sort of like, and here's a fun fact about Klingons type
Gotcha.
thing. So yeah, you're learning that as well as everyone else watching it.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that was, again, kind of my thing with Klingons is like, they use this honor and everything as this like front, and they're all supposed to do the same thing. But then like, I don't know, Worf clearly wanted this to happen, but he was being selfish about it. And he had to be reminded about Alexander and his friends. Like, you have people who care about you, and I mean, ritual suicide and pulling the plug is kind of a pretty deep kind of conversation. I don't know what we want to get into, but
just a little bit. Yeah.
But
yeah, I think overall though, we've talked about this recently, because I mean, and I never, until we sat down and like, I'm rewatching these with you, watching them for the first time, watching them chronologically and taking the time to explore them. First of all, I'm loving it. But yay. What I'm learning is like season 5 of Next Gen is like Worf character development. It is so, there's so many Worf character developments. And, you know, because it starts off really with like the Klingon, you know, the big Klingon politic battle. Yeah. Which again, if anyone didn't catch that one, we did have Mary Chieffo from Discovery on here, who plays L'Rell the Klingon. So we had a lot of good conversation. You can watch it on our YouTube. Links are down below. But
big Klingon politics talk.
Klingon politics talk. But from that, like, we've explored a lot about Worf as a character, but I think that this is another great example of where we're learning more about Klingon culture, and then Worf's like struggle with, am I being a bad Klingon? Like, he's so desperate to maintain that Klingon identity, but then, you know, almost at the expense of like all of the relationships that he's built outside of his Klingon, you know, society. So
exactly, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Like, that came through a lot in this episode to me, and you know, I just loved how Riker, he asked Riker to do the thing because he trusts him, because he's his friend. But Riker's like, but as a friend, I'm having a hard time with this. Like, and I thought Riker and Picard's conversation about this was really interesting, because Picard was like, I can't tell you I can't tell you what to do here. I can steer you in the direction of reminding you that Worf thinks of you as a friend, but I can't give you the answer.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those that, especially as the second in command, you know, Riker, if he, in his role as a Starfleet officer, not as a role as a person, but I think that that's one of the interesting things that Star Trek, especially Next Gen, is able to explore. This idea that you're kind of always at work. And, you know, we talked last week about how there's like families and kids and everything, and there's no escape from it. And so I think when you personally are having like a crisis and a struggle, then you can kind of lean on your work a little bit to just be like, hey, Captain, I don't know how to make this decision personally, so I need you to order me to do something. Right. So I'm absolved of that guilt, because we'll just say that my captain told me to. So it's a good episode. I know you have mixed feelings about Alexander.
I do. We see him in a couple more of these episodes, and sort of coming around. I still think he looks kind of creepy, but he's cute.
He is cute. He's so cute. I'm a sucker for little Klingon kid. But I think it's interesting. I do really like this as in terms of Worf's ongoing deep character development that he's getting in this season. It's a good episode to deal with. And even if it wasn't like there wasn't sort of a ritual Klingon suicide thing, that I mean, even, you're aware of just this idea of honor in the Klingons and to die an honorable death. And, so Worf would rather not suffer through being paralyzed because he would never get that honorable death.
Well, but even beyond the Klingon part of it, like humans deal with that. Like, if I'm going to be paralyzed my entire life, do I want to live like that? Or do I when you can't see a road ahead and you can't see far enough ahead to realize that maybe you could deal with it, it's like not necessarily an easy decision, but it's a consideration when you're in those positions.
Yeah. So let's talk real quick about the Doctor in this, because really the episode is called Ethics, and a lot of the focus is trying to find a cure for what Worf is dealing with. And so if you're watching and you don't remember this is where like there's a new Doctor on board, and who's visiting with Crusher. And this Doctor has like these experimental ideas that she wants to use Worf to test on. And essentially it's because a lot of the motivation, I guess, was she originally brought because she was an expert in Klingons?
No, she was not an expert in Klingons. I don't think she knew anything about Klingon physiology. She was brought on board because she was, I don't remember why she was brought on board.
For a plot.
For plot.
Yeah, but I do remember that they said that they don't know overall Starfleet doesn't know much about Klingons because 9.999 times out of 10 there's no body to study in the way Klingons will Klingon. So there is, so for her she's like, ooh, experiment time.
Sure. I mean, I thought she was really unlikable. She was extremely blasé about human experimentation, essentially, and like I was on the side of, you can't cut these corners to make your experiment conclusions happen faster. Like, she's taking matters into her own hands in a really, I thought, unethical way. I thought I saw a spider on my walls. She really rubbed me the wrong way. But on the flip side, it got me thinking about, people who are extremely successful in the world, names that we know, not always really great people.
Yeah.
And how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. And you're right. Is it Dr. Ina? I think it's Dr. Ina. That it was neuroscience. That was her specialty. Yeah. That's why they brought her on, because he was paralyzed. Thank you. Well remembered. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it reminded me of the episode because, again, if people are here and don't know, you watched Voyager first, so you've seen all of Voyager. And it reminded me of that episode where B'Elanna is it where she has the face hugger? And the Doctor brings in like a historical, like he creates a historical doctor from his database who is like creepy and experimental. I may be meshing two Voyager episodes together in one.
Yeah. I remember what you're talking about. Yeah.
But it has been explored before, and I do think it's interesting, and it brings, as you were kind of leading towards as well, it brings to question, it's like, especially, I think, I used to be in the academic fields and stuff, and it's incredibly competitive. And so you're not just cutting corners to get results faster, but if you cut corners and do things that your colleagues wouldn't, you may have breakthroughs that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so,
Sure.
You know, I think she posed that question of like, well, what if we solve this? What if I solve it with my experimental treatment, and then your family member is going to need that experimental treatment, like, or that treatment? Are you going to reject that? And it's an interesting conversation. I don't think it's a, I mean, the episode is called Ethics. Like, there are entire courses and degrees in ethics that pose these exact questions. So I don't think we can necessarily solve it here. But,
what do you mean? Let's solve it. Let's solve the mystery of ethics.
Right.
Right now.
It does stress me out, though, when he is, like, he gets better, and she's basically like, yeah, I tested that. I did it. And they all kind of have to live with that. And that's hard.
Well, the thing is, this is almost the exact opposite of an after-school special Star Trek episode, because she doesn't learn anything. Like, she literally goes away with a bigger head than she had, and is still this really unlikable character who's willing to make these sacrifices for science. And that bothered me as well. Yeah, I was the same way.
Fair. That now she's going away. She's learned more about Klingons, and she's done this successful treatment that she's going to go brag about and write up and get credit for.
Yeah.
So speaking of after school specials,
shall we?
Shall we? We shall. So we're going to talk about Outcast, episode 17. This is the one where they meet a so-called androgynous race that doesn't specify gender. And Riker falls in love with a character named Soren, who essentially comes out as female. And up front, like, member of LGBTQIA community, I'm glad in the 90s they're exploring gender identity and expression in basically trans rights, which is great. But the way they do it is not the best, I think. And I debated a lot on how to talk about this one, because I think it's an important conversation to have. But I was left with a taste in my mouth that I didn't like. And I was just like, what? Why don't I like this? And so I kind of looked up a little other people's thoughts and feelings about it. So I can't totally take credit for the insight here. But I think that taste that was left in my mouth was this fact that it does kind of condone conversion therapy by the end. Like, it's left as like, oh, conversion therapy worked. And I think also I found a note that Jonathan Frakes, Riker, commented that he had wished they'd gone further in portraying Soren as more gender ambiguous. Whereas they definitely play this character as female. Which, you know, and there was a lot of effort put towards trying to include these stories because Gene Roddenberry had wanted to share LGBT stories. But it's just left that you're kind of like Star Trek said trans rights in the 90s, which is awesome, but I feel weird about this episode and I don't know why. So anyway, I'd love to hear that's my soapbox, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
That's actually a good way of putting it, that I didn't love it and I don't know why type of coming away. You know, I think it's probably a lot to do, obviously, with where we are now. I mean, we're in the 5th wave of feminism. We're in a time where people are really having legitimate discussions on all different levels about, you know, the spectrum and non-binary. And there's a lot more public and constant discussion about that now. So when the episode was was written, it was still very binary, right? It's male, female.
Even Riker, like it feels dated, right? Because we are having those conversations in our society these days, and then you go and watch this, and Riker's like, "But I don't understand. There's men and there's women, and how can you be not either of those things?" So it is interesting. But sorry, carry on.
No, and I mean, there was like, the thing about the episodes, there's like, when you watch it from our eyes, there's things like, oh my gosh, they're actually discussing personal pronouns. Like that's not something you would think would even happen in the early 90s at all. But then they're just talking about it in a binary way. So you're like, oh, great. And then, oh, great. And then, oh, like, and then my thing was like, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I don't think they were actually using the word androgyny correctly. And also the people really didn't look androgynous. I mean, there were clearly men and women playing, you know, and they tried, but I was like, this, you're not using that term in the way that you think you mean it.
Nice. And I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Right, exactly. You keep using that word. And they just didn't, I think it was sort of an afterthought that like, hey, if we just dress them up the same way and kind of make everyone's, you know, contour the same, then they will be androgynous. No. Yeah. And then, the conversion therapy thing was really upsetting. Yeah. To say the least.
Yeah. Especially in the context of the 90s when that was more used and shamefully
mainstream.
Yeah. And that, I mean, we have plenty of, unfortunately, it's still something that happens, but we have plenty of studies now that show that it does way more harm than good, that it should never be done and should never be used. And to have it in the 90s be like, and it worked, is damaging.
Very.
Damaging.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
that was hard to take away at the end of the episode. And
And it is funny because I mean I have had the personal pronoun discussion was it was interesting to watch and it was very. I was surprised because I did look up who the writer was, and it was Jerry Ryan, and like she's not like she's a good writer, or Jerry Taylor, not Jerry Ryan, not 709, Jerry Taylor, and she's written a lot of very she's written a lot of very good sort of some of my favorite episodes, and so I was like, is it the writing that's sort of off that I'm not feeling, or maybe it was just the context of the time of trying to get this message across very early on. I mean, now I have multiple friends who have come out as non-binary, and you know, using them they pronouns is not a thing. And even in, you know, She-Ra, they have like a non-binary character, and so when they were having that discussion of like, but what do I refer to you as? Like, are you a he or a she? And I'm like, just say they. So it was like, I think it's just a little bit dated, may have been why I was like, like it's not hard.
Yeah, but and then again on the sort of like, oh, you did well, and then I didn't do well. When they're talking about like male, female characteristics, it was watching Riker explain the differences between men and women. I could sort of tell like, wow, this scene went through that writer's room like multiple times. They were being very careful.
It went up and down that chain so much.
Yeah, because he was because it's also the future, right? So he was saying like they're equal standing, you know, women can be officers and this and that, but men are taller.
And different sexual organs.
Yeah, and he was like, and that's it.
Yeah. And maybe that's some of it. You know, you and I personally have talked about writing and our experiences with that as well. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just part of this, is maybe this was just a heavily edited episode.
Could be.
You know, that you can feel the cooks in the kitchen, you know?
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. Like, but I almost respect that a little, because I could tell they were being careful. I could tell they were trying to be like, how much can we say? What should we say here to reflect a modern society? What should we say here to push the envelope? Mm-hmm. But what envelope are we not pushing? But then it really, at the end, with the conversion therapy thing, they sort of blow it all out of the water.
Yeah. Yep. Unfortunately. But, you know, this is one of those things, and we'll explore this when we get to Deep Space Nine too, but Star Trek is very on the cutting edge of trans rights. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and I support that. I think that's awesome.
Definitely.
That's why we love it.
Yeah.
So yeah. Let's go on to Cause and Effect, which is the Frasier episode. Every time I see... Oh, sorry, there's a question here. So, Domestic asked, how much of the androgyny is nature and how much was nurture? I mean, that's a good question, and I think that's kind of what you were alluding to with how much are they using the term androgynous correctly, you know? That, are they... Is this a society? And that's where I think they probably tried to... I can suspect that they tried to... explore how to describe this society and say, okay, are they by nature like asexual? Like, do they,
right?
You know, do they not have sexual organs? Do they not reproduce like in the same way? Or as Domestic was asking, is it a nurture thing? Is it a societal? We've eliminated gender identity from our culture, and I don't think I don't remember them really clarifying that.
I don't think they clarified that either, but what you just said I think what they meant to say was asexual more than androgynous. I think there was that misuse of that word, but we have some more comments coming in.
Yeah, so the Orville did do a good episode on that too. And then yeah, and I think that so the comment was, do you feel that having Riker like one who comes out as female is kind of pandering, like he wasn't allowed to like someone who wasn't female identifying? And I think I highly agree, and I think that was Jonathan Frakes' criticism of it as well, that they want to tell us there has to be a story arc, but like it would have been more interesting if the person that Riker had fallen in love with had either stayed non-binary or was, even if they came out as female, if she appeared to be more male. I think that was where Jonathan Frakes, and I'm just interpreting one comment that I read that he had said about this, but that it would have been a little bit more controversial. But again, I mean, Gene Roddenberry was always playing that line of like, but we can't get canceled, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of a hard one.
It's a hard one. Yeah.
But it's interesting. So thank you everyone for listening to that. I think both of us were kind of like, oh, how are we going to talk about this episode? but I'm glad we did. And I think, it's interesting. So Cause and Effect, episode 18. This is the one where the credits roll and I see Kelsey Grammer in it, and I'm like, Frasier!
I was so excited. I was like, oh my God. And every time I see a Frasier character in a Star Trek episode, I just think about Noel.
I know. So we are both hardcore Frasier fans. And hardcore Frasier fans. And I love to, Samantha, and I think people online may have seen that meme that was going around. I'd seen it before, but it really made the rounds lately, where they say that that Cheers is a holodeck episode, and how many people have played characters in Star Trek. I love that. I love it.
I have seen that going around.
That's fabulous. But this one I actually talked about on my Science of Sci-Fi episode club a few weeks ago, in terms of the time loop, the time travel. So we don't have to get too much into the science of it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because this is I personally think this is a great episode and it's fun to watch.
It is so fun to watch. And like, my main note was just about the pacing of how they slowly like start to get further into the loop, and then it just sets back, and then it gets slowly further, and then it sets back. And as it sets back, they're all of them start to learn new things and get a little bit farther. And I just love the way it starts with the poker game, and then like they're it's like a normal episode, and then suddenly like little teeny things happen, and then like it sets back, and Beverly's like, wait a second. 8, 3, king, ace.
It's just so good. It's so good. I love
so good.
Yeah, that poker game. I mean, I'm a sucker for the TNG poker scenes, but I do love when they're like, wait, I know you're like, how do I know?
Yeah.
How do I know what you have? And they're all, yeah.
Yeah, and then they treat it kind of like you treat deja vu, like, which is weird when it's happening, and it's kind of whatever, and then you sort of shake your head, and you're like, the second you shake your head, the deja vu like goes away, and you realize that you're like, that was weird, maybe that wasn't even deja vu, you know. And then but when deja vu is really strong, it's such a weird feeling. Yeah. And just the more and more times they go through it, and Beverly's the first one to realize it, well, I mean, that we see, obviously. Yeah. And then so she has to keep going through it and get stronger and stronger. And then I love that the second to last loop, like they get almost all the way, and the second to last one was Data with all the threes, but then it resets again.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Awesome.
They went through all that effort with the threes, and now they have to go back again.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Yeah, it is so good, and I love. The funny thing is I've watched it, thankfully, because I did it on my episode club. Like I had remembered it, but when I went back for that time and had watched this episode, I was like, how do the threes play in? I'm like, I know there's a way. I know there's a trick. Mm-hmm. And then it turning out to be, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I thought the same thing. I was like, how are these threes the thing? But it's his
the pips. Yeah.
Pips. Yeah.
The fact that was the right, Riker's suggestion was the right thing to do, because because that was the 3 pips, and that was just how Data's mind works.
Exactly. I was like, okay, I don't follow that at all.
But it's great, and I think like that's what I love about it, is the fact that like he could only send one word. He's like, I can get one thing through, and so all he got through was the number 3, and then you're like, what is that gonna do? So good. And then the whole reveal, like that you have another ship come out of this loop. And it's basically like Kelsey Grammer going like full on captain pose, by the way. And he's just like, can I help you? What's wrong? And they're like, bro. We haven't seen those uniforms in a long time. And we got some bad news for you.
Hilarious. Because it takes him like, he's like, well, no. I'm here to help you.
Yeah. Why? We don't need your help. Why are you here?
So funny.
Yeah, and I love too that there's this implication that Starfleet has like a base standard time. You know, that there are like buoys that are set up throughout the quadrant that are like standard, where he was like, hey, ping the nearest like chrono buoy or whatever for the time. What do you think what time do you think it is? And that's fun. I love it.
Yeah. So good.
It's a really good episode. And this is one where it's like, because like you said, the pacing, And as a viewer, you're taken on that journey too, of just when it resets, you're like, God, they were so close. They were so close.
Yeah.
And just the way they describe kind of this time loop that they're stuck in, and then when they're, and I think probably my favorite scene is when they figured it out. Like, they figured out that there is a loop that's happening, but they don't know how to get out of it. And they're all kind of sitting in the ready room, and they're just like, okay, like, how do we do this?
But then they have that same conversation again. Like, they get all the way to that place, and then,
they're like, I think we've had this conversation before.
We figured it out last time, and we just ran out of time.
Yeah. Like, and I love that time travel idea aspect too, of being like, well, what if the solution we're coming up with now is the same one that we came up with last time? You know, how do we know that this is different than what we did before? And yeah, the writing is just, I think it's really solid in this episode. It is. I really like this one. And it's got Frasier in it.
And I mean, that just makes every episode better.
It just does. Any Cheers or Frasier episode that comes up, that's good. So does each loop create a new timeline? So that's a really good question. They do kind of treat it as, so the question is like, I won't get too much into the time travel because I did spend like half an hour talking about it before. And you can check out, if you didn't see my previous one, you can find it on my YouTube channel where we talk about the science behind this episode. But it's basically like, it's like they go through this time loop, right? That they progress through their time, and then it resets. And then they start down another path, and then it resets. And then they start down another path, and then it resets. And it's just the fact that, like, whatever one they chose that got them out of that reset, that's now continued on. So they've not spawned, like, 80 different timelines because that timeline has always come back and been reset. And the one that they do break out of is because they were able to send a signal to Data that did spawn a timeline that popped them out of it. So yeah, within that loop, there's multiple universes that have happened, but then they're contained to like that time frame, whereas we have one that continues on. And then, you know, these poor dudes back from here come out of that too, and they're just like, what? So, yeah.
Oh my God. How long were they there again? Kelsey Grammer?
Oh, it was, I'd have to find my notes.
Like 20 years or something,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it was decades. It was decades, which I love. Sorry, I'm finding my notebook. Yeah, it's, because they came out in, I'm sure someone will get this in the chat before I get to my notebook here. But they have, Space Frasier. I found it. Yeah, so they thought it had been 3 weeks for them, but they were coming out in 2278, which, was a few decades, which sucks. Sucks.
Sucks.
So yeah, good episode. I love it. It's fun to, it's always, this is one where it's like, if I'm sort of scanning looking for a Star Trek episode to just put on, this is one that's usually pretty high on the list. So
gotcha. Awesome.
Space Frasier.
Space
anyway. So yeah, hashtag Space Frasier. The next episode is the first duty, and duty. I promise I won't do that every time. But episode 19, and this is another one where when I watch Cause and Effect and it starts to autoplay the next episode, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good episode. I do like this one. This is the one where Wesley Crusher had the accident at Starfleet Academy. I really like this episode. And he has the accident. A fellow crewmate was killed. He was in this like hotshot squadron, and they're under trial for the death to try to figure out what happened. I mean, it's an investigation like there would be in any accident in Starfleet. And I really like it. First of all, just because it kind of takes us out of the sort of episodic storylines that we're used to on the ship, and it's like, you know, oh, let's get some sort of lower deck Starfleet Academy type look. Yeah. And you texted me and you're like, it's Tom Paris.
I was like, why is Tom there? Why is Tom being Tom? And why is he named Nick?
Why is Tom being Tom? He is, I mean, is very Tom Paris vibes here. And to be fair, I think if they almost could have got away with that. I can understand how they wanted to have like Admiral Paris and to have Tom Paris's whole storyline with his dad and have a bit more. But if they had I personally would have loved if like they had been busted. They did. I mean, they got busted, and then Nick got sent to like got arrested for it.
Yeah,
and then that's where we find, and then Nick goes on the Voyager.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like he could have either just been Nick or I don't know. Anyway, it was distracting.
Our own headcanon. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I so I do really like this episode. So
this was a good episode. I think you're right. It takes you away from the Enterprise like core crew for a little while and like widens the universe, introduces some new people, and we see Wesley at school, and it's and we what else? Oh, Boothby.
Yeah. You saw more Boothby. Yeah.
I love Boothby.
Had you seen Boothby in Next Gen yet?
I don't think so, but Voyager, he has some scenes.
Yeah.
And you were like, remember this guy. He's a big deal.
Yeah. We love him.
We love him. We do love him. I love him.
So but your reaction to that is just that's on brand for a Star Trek fan.
It's what?
That's just on brand now as a Star Trek fan.
Good.
That your Boothby shows up and you go, Boothby. Everyone does it.
Love it.
Yeah, it's good. And and it's great too, like, because we had seen his relationship with Janeway. But this is, if we had been watching this in the order that they had come out, then this is sort of that first introduction to Boothby, again, being a mainstay. Like, he had been, I think Picard had mentioned him to Wesley before when he says, oh, look for Boothby. Mm-hmm. He asked Wesley, he's like, did Boothby, have you met him type thing?
Yeah.
But then being able to see him and to see Picard interact with him is really sweet.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the episode. It was great to see, Wesley obviously comes around to the right side, but it's a lot of peer pressure, and the temptation to complete the lie makes sense. I mean, obviously they're also dealing with guilt. He's dealing with a lot more guilt than the others seem to be.
Yeah.
But and it's an age where everything's all or nothing. So if you lose a year, that's a long ass time.
Yeah.
And he now has, as Picard says, a harder road because everyone knows what happened.
Yeah.
And he just made it worse by trying to lie out of it. And he has to deal with those consequences.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like, the whole journey of, I mean, obviously we know as viewers, because we see them behind the scenes, sort of outside of the trial being like, don't tell anyone, you're going to keep the secret. But then having kind of the whole reveal of, this starburst maneuver that they were trying to do is some hotshot thing that hasn't been done in 100 years. And then knowing that character, Nick, that, where it's like, oh no, that he seems like the type, to go out literally in a blaze of glory and have this legacy. And I think that we joke a lot about the after school special aspect of some of these Next Gen episodes, but some of them are written really well. And I think this is one of those where it's a very relatable story of that cool gang, right? The cool kids, and they want to show off and do something awesome and be remembered forever, and then something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Product of a lot of 90s stories.
Yeah.
It's all that peer pressure. But
oh yeah.
but it's a good it is a good story, and it does always take me on that journey, and you feel, I feel like they cast his dad really well, you know, the kid's dad that died, and Wesley's moral compass. I mean, it is funny. I mean, to be fair, is that even I think when we're talking about like how much guilt Wesley was carrying for it versus the rest of that gang, they don't have Beverly and Picard showing up at their door being like, "Are you okay? Like, we don't have to talk about it. Like, are you okay? We understand. We believe you, Wesley. We believe you. We know you." And then when Beverly is like, "All right, we'll get people investigating this. Like, there's no way that footage was made up." And then you just see his face being like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, and Picard was really hard on him in the episode, which I actually appreciated.
Yeah,
you know, because he messed up. Like, he really messed up.
Yeah, and Picard gives it to him, man. He's like, "Yeah, you were busted. You are busted." And it is it is that feeling of like, we're not mad, we're just disappointed. And I viscerally felt that. I was like, you disappointed Picard.
Yeah. That is the worst possible thing to hear. Yeah.
And they make you feel it. So, but I think they do a good job. I think it's a good episode. It's a good story. It's a really good story. And to be just contained in one episode is impressive. It's a big emotional arc.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts on that one?
Nope. Nope.
So,
good one.
Good one. Last one. Cost of Living, episode 20. Loxana's back.
Yay!
My favorite. I genuinely love her. I am not being sarcastic. Oh, thank you. I love her. I love her. I'm like, she is the woman, like, she's a level of chaos that I aspire to. Like, she doesn't, because I'm not a chaotic person and chaotic people stress me out, and I feel like she's a chaotic person that I could deal with. You know, where
That's big, yeah.
doesn't have anything like that. So, yeah, it's funny. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny, like, I think I've come around to her, but when I see her show up, it's kind of like Q. I'm like, oh God, am I gonna love her or hate her this time?
Right.
And she's there's times when I'm like, okay, stop talking, let someone get a word in edgewise, stay out of Deanna's way.
Yeah,
you are but then there's times when I'm like, oh, you're kind of fun. And her with Alexander was adorable. I mean,
so
amazing.
So cute that she literally was just like, she just saw this kid who's just kind of bored and doesn't like hanging out with other kids, and he's, when he's struggling with his dad. And I love the scene where Deanna and Loxana are sitting in 10 forward, and Worf drags Alexander in, and he's like, "You have to talk to him because our contract's not working out." And Loxana's like, "What contract?" You're
so good.
Parents and children. Like, why?
So good.
I love it.
So good. Yeah, that was fantastic. And I do think, so Deanna, unfortunately, in this situation was literally being a therapist. So she couldn't be friendly. So Loxana swooped in there to kind of help out a little bit in that regard. Then there's all the holodeck stuff.
Yeah. I love the kid, the holodeck stuff. Like, it's just, and I feel like that's how Loxana's brain works. Is that
probably
holodeck. And I love when Worf comes in and just like, and that thing is like making all the faces, and he's just like pops it. I love it. I love it. It's such a fun episode. And I love, we've talked about, I think the last Loxana episode that we had was the one where she falls in love with that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Another ritual suicide storyline.
Yeah. And that one legitimately makes me cry. Because she really has a chance at happiness.
Yeah.
But,
well, in this one, she's in love with another person. Oh, and it's all like online dating, basically. Yeah. Like before that was ever a thing. Like this is early 90s. Like you don't know.
Yeah. This was this was classified ad type dating. And she very much was like, it was, the way they describe it is very much online dating.
Yeah, like, exactly. It's like, I haven't met him yet. And blah, blah, blah.
It's so funny.
And as someone who's done her fair share of online dating, accurate portrayal.
It's so funny. And I love too, like, it was kind of sweet when they first show up, when that guy first shows up. And it does, like, it's one of those things where it's like, they're both awkward. They both are like, but not as bad. And I think there could be something. And like, oh, he's kind of cute. Oh, she's kind of cute. And they kind of move in, and that hand just...
And she's like, oh, well, this is not going to work.
It's not going to work. That is not going to be a thing for Loxana.
Yeah. So funny. It's like, he definitely misrepresented himself on his profile.
Exactly. I love it. Yeah, it's so funny. It's such a great, I don't know. It's
a good episode.
It's a cute episode. And Alexander's starting to grow on you a little bit.
A little.
But again, more Worf growth.
We have more Worf. We have more #aworfable scenes.
So many aworfable scenes. Let's be honest here. He is such like that awkward dad of just like, guys, damn, I don't know what to do with this kid right now. Deanna, I need your help. Deanna, I need your help.
Deanna, I know. Him and Deanna together are so good.
They are.
Because you can tell he respects what she can do, like as a therapist, and as a Betazoid. But he's really leaning on her, which I kind of love.
Yeah. And in the last in the one where in Ethics, where he asks her to, look after Alexander.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so heavy.
It's heavy. But really cute. Aworfable.
Yeah. So aworfable. And, I mean, the ending of the episode was, like, so classic. He's like...
Peak. That's why we came up with this term. It was peak aworfable. Where he's, like, in the mud bath. Right up to there. And he's just like... What does he say? He's like, I'm supposed to be enjoying this. I love it.
You're supposed to just sit here.
Yeah, that was it.
That's what it is.
So
you're supposed to just... And that's like anytime I go into a sauna, which is very rare, but that's what I think. I'm like, I'm hot, I'm sweaty, I'm bored.
Yeah.
Like that's me.
I'm supposed to be enjoying this.
Right, exactly. Is this supposed to be enjoyable?
So funny. Yeah, really good. Really cute episode. And it's just, I think it was a great pairing of Loxana and Alexander.
Definitely.
They needed someone as chaotic and not rule following as her to let Alexander have some fun.
Exactly.
Really good.
Yeah. And I love that she could see that immediately, Yeah. And just took it by the, she forced herself into that, and he really liked her, and I thought that's so
One of my favorite scenes too is when he's with Worf and they're having dinner, and he's like, ha! Ha! And Worf's like, stop it. She's like, it's my laughing hour. Ha! Ha! And he's like, Loxana, no. Miss Troy told me to.
Yeah, or like the kids show thing.
Yep.
In the which again, creepy kids shows. We can talk about that some other time. But Worf's like, no, it's eating time. It's dinner time.
It's so great. And even just when he goes, and what is really touching is then Alexander goes to Loxana and he's like sitting there while she's having to deal with all the wedding stuff. And she's just like, oh, I have to go. Like, I made a promise to him. We gotta go. And grabs his hand and they go play in the holodeck. It's really sweet. I love it. So yeah, good set of episodes. I think.
Really good set. Yeah.
Yeah, they I think we've established that season 5 is a great stride for Next Gen.
Yes, it is.
So I think next week, I think we'll still be back. Stay tuned on social stuff for any changes to that. But I think we're going to wrap out season 5.
Awesome.
At the end. So we'll probably, I think, because they do a 2-parter as usual at the end of season 5 and into season 6. So we'll probably just close out that 2-parter and go through season 6, episode 1.
Sounds great.
But, yeah, it should be fun. So, yeah, just to kind of close out here, thanks to everyone for hanging out. Even if you weren't chatting, your company is always welcome, and we're happy to have you here listening to us. If you're here on Twitch, please do hit that follow button so you can find us whenever we're back online. And if you are an Amazon Prime member, you can subscribe for free, which is great. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to get notifications when we're back on, which really helps me and us continue to do our fun adventures. So I will be back on Tuesday for my episode club at 4 o'clock Pacific time, where we're going to be talking about 2 episodes in Dark Matter, season 2, episodes 7 and 8. And it's going to be really, really fun. And then, like I said, couple other things in between. I'm teaching Astronomy 101 on Fridays now, so we'll be doing week 2 of that this Friday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. But that's enough of that. I think, thank you, Samantha. This was fun.
Thank you.
And everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for hanging out. Any last
See you next Sunday.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Live long and prosper.